I'm Ian Cheeseman, and you might be used to on this channel of watching me do my match day vlogs. And thanks very much for your support. I really appreciate all the people all around the world who watch it and send me lovely messages. You may or may not know I also do an audio podcast once a week with various guests. And this week, sometimes I put little extracts of the audio podcast up, but we do record it on Zoom, so there is a visual version of it as well. So this week, just for a change, because we're in a week when City are playing, I'm going to put pretty much the whole audio podcast up. So you're going to get to see quite a bit of it this week. But that doesn't mean to say you shouldn't subscribe to the audio version because it won't always be done like this. So I hope you enjoy this. I hope you enjoy, the contributions of the guests that were on this week's program. But each and every week, via SoundCloud, on my social media, I put out links, etc. And of course, you can find it on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts by searching for Ian Cheeseman and Forever Blue. So enjoy this podcast, and thanks for listening and watching. And isn't it great to be a Blue? Just before I introduce my guests, and I've got a great lineup as always today. I did promise on last week's podcast that I would report back to you on a dinner that I was hosting, or a lunch really, that I was hosting on Friday, at which the special guest was Danny Wilson, who is the Director of Operations at Manchester City. And the people who were at that lunch, which was at the Etihad Stadium, had lots of questions, as you can imagine, lined up to ask him. And I said I would let you know how that went. So he did say to me at the beginning and to the audience that what he couldn't do was break confidences. So since he spoke to groups like City Matters, which is one of the proactive city groups who have regular meetings with the club, and also with 1894 Group and Solid Citizens. He didn't want to say anything in that environment that was breaking confidence of those groups, or was telling information to us, as it were, more than he's already telling to those groups. So with that bearing in mind, these were some of the questions. For example, why are there no new season tickets? And he explained that up to 30% of season ticket holders at some games don't actually come to the game. And so, therefore, there are a lot of season tickets who are not using their season tickets regularly. He's not ruled out new season tickets in the future. Obviously, there's a new stand to open, and there already are Flexi Gold tickets, which I know we've discussed on this podcast, and are a slightly different type of season ticket, which some people don't like, but however, they do exist. So there is a way to buy season tickets. He talked about away tickets. Now, again, we've explained on this podcast many times the way that tickets are divided: 20%, for example, to the supporters club, 5% to staff and people connected to the club, 10% to corporates, a small percentage to 18 to 25s, and then the rest of them going to the highest points for the loyalties. Nothing's changed. It's been like that for a long, long time. And he says that corporates don't get any particular advantage. They just get that allocation. And many corporate people who put lots of money into the club don't get the tickets that they ask for. So it's not as black and white as you might think it is, in terms of if you've got loads of money, you get all the tickets. He talked about there's been a lot of criticism of the club about the way that away fans have been mixed in with home fans. It happened at Liverpool, it happened at Real Madrid, and it happened. I actually saw it against Plymouth a little bit. He said, as we probably already know, 250 Plymouth people who, with Plymouth postcodes, have been identified, had their ticket money returned, and those tickets were cancelled, and that the club is very actively working to try to shut down these avenues and the way that people can pick up tickets. He was asked about parking. He says the club's always in dialogue with the local council, and explains that some of the areas where there are now parking restrictions are because of potential future housing developments, etc. So even though they look like industrial complexes, that's the reason why that's happening. And they are actively, working to stop the further expansion, if you like, of that. In terms of parking on site, there is a limitation that the club can have so many places on site. So if they do develop that area, which is currently flat parking land on the backside of the east stand, then there might have to be something like a multi-storey, smaller in actual land space, with the same amount of capacity, but they can't increase the capacity in that area. As far as trams are concerned, they are running currently after games every 6 minutes, and they're all double units. The tram companies have said that they can't get bigger than double units because they don't fit on the platforms, and they don't have enough stock to increase the frequency more than every 6 minutes. The club have found a way to have these buses, which people will know about, that go out radiate around Manchester, and that the club are doing that at, to some extent, their own cost to try to make travelling to the game a little easier for people that outlie in those areas. So they are trying to actively improve that as well. He confirmed that the aim is that the new stand extension, which you can see going up if you go to the Etihad, will open with, if it goes according to plan, in January of 2026. And once it opens, that's when they can consider new season tickets and stuff like that. And that concerts would potentially then come back to the stadium as well in 2026. So that's what I promised, that I would report back what he said, what the questions were, and those are the answers as honestly as I can give them to you. So let's move on to other things. Let's move on to the football. And let's start with two wins in a week. Obviously, City had last time we did a podcast, they'd lost two in a week. This week they won two in a week. So everybody's smiling again, Nedum, and are we all pretty happy now with the direction of travel?
Happy. Like, yeah, I would say so. I would say so. I think the draws just happened as well. Is it playing Bournemouth? Is it home or away?
Away.
Away. So that'll
Yeah.
be a tricky game in itself, but it's the quarterfinal of the FA Cup, it should be. And in some ways for me, I'm excited for this part of the season. Obviously, like Ake's dropped out and a few more defenders that are missing, but it's very clear what the club need to do. They're trying to qualify for the Champions League. They're trying to finish in the top four. And I think when they are driven like that, that's when you see them win four Premier League titles in a row. That's when you see them hit 100 points. That's when you see them like have a treble. And even though it's not a case of playing these last few weeks in terms of trying to win a league title, they know that every game is huge in itself. And I think when the players are like that, their managers like that, I think at times we can see the best version of them. And yeah, I'm hopeful for this back end of the season. Obviously, as I say, you could do with certain players being in better health, but in reality, certain players are trying to finish the season well, and I think that makes for an exciting finish for us.
And just to clarify to those who are listening, because we have listeners all over the world, it's amazing how many people contact me about the podcast, which is very, very welcome, and I'm very grateful for that. That you, although you do some work for the club, you don't work for the. I mean, I know you
No,
do a lot for the community, City in the community, but in terms of the club, so asking you, which people tell me to do when you come on a podcast or anybody like you know, what's going to happen with the 115
oh,
charges and everything. None of us know. You don't know. So it's point me
no.
asking you, really, isn't it?
No, for me, like, so across the last few years, I've really paid attention to it. And firstly, like, I was a fan of the club before I was a player for the club. So for me, playing for the club was me living my dream. And as I look back now, to be able to come back into the club and do stuff that represents them, whether it's traveling to this place to do media, to be representative, that's great. But I'm not a staff member. And I think some people do forget that. And at times, people come to me, oh, what's the insight? What's the scoop on this? I have no idea. I've got no access to that building beyond when I'm supposed to be working for them. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't know. Sometimes I'm okay with not knowing because it's not my business as such. But if they need it, if they need me to know anything, I think the right sort of people will let me know. But for now, I'm the same. I'd say I'm a fan. I'm a fan like when I was 10 years old, except now I'm 38. It's just the same situation, watching the team, trying to enjoy it, going through the highs, the lows, the stresses. And even yesterday, for example, even though City did play well, Plymouth had one shot until that second goal went in and then the third, I was stressed, which is a ridiculous thing to think because, such a dominant team like that. But yeah, I'm definitely not a staff member, just a fan of the football club like everybody else.
And your previous answer sort of illustrates that really when you say that, City getting into the top four, stroke five this season, qualifying for the Champions League. That's said because at this moment in time, that's what we assume will be needed
Mm.
until something changes and this action either it disappears and goes away and City are completely exonerated or they're punished in some way. That's the
Mm.
only way this club can think, can't it?
Yeah, I would say so. But then, like you say, when you talk about the club, you talk about so many different aspects of it, so many different stakeholders, whether it's the fans, whether it's the staff, whether it's the players, whether it's the board, whether it's people in the hierarchy. Everyone's got slightly different takes and perspectives on it all. But for us, who have an interest in it because it's our football club, like we don't know any different. I think in recent weeks, a few sort of media outlets have started to say to me, "Oh, when something happens, can you come on? Can you come on? Can you come on?" And to be honest, like I've said no because I don't really want to come on because I'll be honest, like I try and be as neutral as I can be. but I'm rooting for something that suits the needs of pretty much the majority of this podcast in itself. So if you then try and put me out there, like unfortunately, because like the downturn in form has been as significant as it has been in recent months, like because some people have enjoyed City not playing so well. I'm like the City correspondent, so they come to me, they throw things at me, and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm just trying to like the toughest has been the Champions League. I'll be watching the games, I'm in a green room, I'm watching City not be at their best, they lose a game, and some people in the green room are celebrating it because that's the story. And usually at this point for me, I'm the type of fan where when things are going well, I don't want to go and start an argument with someone. I just want to go home, just want to bury my head. But instead, the lights are on now. I'm going to pretend everything's all right instead of me inside thinking, oh, this is the last place on earth I want to be. And so with this sort of like final stage now, I'm rooting for everything to be completely fine. I'm rooting for that desperately. If it ends up not being the case, then people ask me to talk about it, but like the fan in me is still there, and I want it to be completely fine. I want them to be able to move on from it, and people to not always have this thing where they're excited. Oh, they're gonna get this, they're gonna get that. Like nobody knows. And I think people sometimes talk as if they do, but in reality they don't. And the people that do know, there's such a small group of them, and the information will come out when it comes out. But some people want this, some people want that. But I just want the club to be able to move forward.
I agree that, I mean, people ask me all the time, and whilst I might speculate about this could happen or that could happen, just because that's the conversation that they want to have, I have no idea. I've never claimed
Definitely.
to have any idea. And anybody that I meet that says, I know what's happening, or I'm pretty sure I know what's going to happen, I'm thinking, BS, you don't
Yeah.
have a clue. And I've got
Mm.
to say this as well. I know it's not quite related, but I can relate exactly what you're saying because when I was at the BBC and I was reading out the sports news every half an hour into our breakfast program. We played United in the Derby match on the night before. I think, if I remember rightly, it was a Thursday, and I was reading the sports news on the Friday, and City got beat 5-0 at Old Trafford. And I came in the next day, and I thought, just like you, everybody's going to be laughing. Everybody, this is the story. They're all going to be fired up for it. And I've got to face up to this. I'd much rather not go in today, really, really not report on this story. I went in, and even though I was at the BBC, but everybody knew I was a City fan. I put my City shirt and scarf on, and because I'm on the radio, so they can't see me anyway, and read out the news. But what was the hilarious thing about this was at 6 a.m., when I was supposed to go on the first time, suddenly we all got told there's a problem with the transmitter at Winter Hill or wherever it is that the signal goes out from. So don't worry, we're not doing the 6 o'clock news. So I started writing the 6:30 news. Come round to 6:30, still not on air. 7 went, 7:30 went, 8:30 we were told it's going on soon. So for all this time, I hadn't read out the news at all. One of the big bosses from the BBC came in, walks straight to my desk and said, "This is you, isn't it? You've sabotaged the transmitter because you don't want to go on air." And I said, "Honestly, nothing to do with me." I ended up reading it out once at 9 o'clock, and I was so relieved that story I didn't have to keep repeating one after the other.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
You
Brilliant.
didn't play in that game, by the way, did you?
No, 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 not 5-0 at Old Trafford. No, I've had a few losses there, but no, not 5-0. Not there.
Speaking of United, who've they got in the next round?
Oh, by the way, I should also, of course, introduce everybody. Nedum Onuoha, you know that City legend, but we also got Paul and we've got Toby from the Forever Blue team. That was Paul's voice. So, Paul, just tell me where you are as a City fan at the moment. I know we went out to Madrid together, so we saw the end of that particular journey. You were also in Paris together when City got beat over there as well. But things have turned a little bit now. We've got some new players in January. And obviously, I've been very impressed with Kushinov, and we saw Rice play yesterday. It was pretty much faultless. Nico Gonzalez in midfield looks a very promising player. Still got to make my mind up about is he as good as Rodri, and maybe it'll take a little bit of time. And Marmoush is added to the attacking quality, and that's not to mention the new young Argentinian who at some point is going to make his debut as well. So, where are you, Paul, at the moment?
I think I said this to you when we was in Madrid, Ian, that I'm actually feeling alive on the terraces again. I'm actually getting involved a hell of a lot more than I've always been involved. But I'm over the seasons that have gone by, you kind of, you're getting beat 1-0, you're thinking, it's all right, we'll get them in at half time and we'll be 3-1 this. 9 times out of 10 it was. But now, it feels like there's a bit of jeopardy on the terraces now that we've gone a bit back to the same old City where we go 1-0 up and get beat.
You didn't feel like jeopardy against Plymouth, though, did you?
Um, I did when they scored. It all come crushing back again when they scored. I mean, there's nothing worse than being. I wasn't next to the away fans yesterday, but I was below the away fans yesterday. And there's nothing worse than listening to that and you sort of thinking, "Oh God, no, we're gonna do this again." And in the end, I mean, I've been on social media today, and there's quite a lot of people sort of dismissing that performance as being like not all that. And I'm thinking, I thought we played pretty well yesterday. Am I missing something? And it's like you see there's this media thing about Kushinov that he had a nightmare debut. He didn't. He got sold out by one of the senior players who was undecisive, and he had to react. And all right, yeah, they got a goal from it, but it wasn't a nightmare, a nightmare debut. I was going to ask you. I've been on Twitter today, and I said I was coming on this tonight. So loads of people, well, about 8, have wanted to ask Nedum questions, and one of them was, "What's your take on the Kushinov situation? Do you think that people are giving him a bit of an hard time purely because he's at City, or what do you think?"
Good question, that. Also, in regards to the performance yesterday, like in reality, it's a very professional performance because that's the same Plymouth team that ended up beating Liverpool, that ended up beating Brentford, two teams that would have wanted to be in the late stages of the competition, whether they made changes or not. They're two teams that are in the division above. So the fact that City, obviously, like Plymouth scored, but that was the only shot they had in the game. I think if you want to talk about like Plymouth traveling up to Manchester thinking they had a chance, well, you just didn't have enough shots to have won a game of football. They had one shot. That matters, yeah. And then in terms of Kujanov as well, I think just because his debut was under those lights that seemed extra bright on the day, by the way, it's the prime time game, it's the new signing. It's a signing that nobody really knew anything about unless you were watching the French league. And, unless you're big on Uzbek centre backs or whatever, which I imagine most people aren't. So the way that he started, I remember the feeling myself when I was watching, like you almost felt bad for him. And I think for some, that's a memory that will stick with them for the longest time. And it's always the case with certain players where they always remember one thing. Like for example, in my line of work now, people talk about Spurs, for example. When they talk about Spurs, they talk about the crazy high line that they have. But the game they're talking about is Chelsea last year, halfway through the season. And since then, there've been 50 other games. So something will stick in someone's mind and it will dictate how they feel about the player. But what I like about, say, Kujanov is for his style of play, like he's a youngster who wants to get stuck in and wants to defend. He can do stuff on the ball, which is great, but that desire to defend is there. And when you look at City's social media, the tackles are there, you can buy into it. It's the sort of grit that you want to see, especially in younger players. And knowing that he's got some really good seniors around him, that's potentially a really good signing. And in reality, let's call it what it is. If he wasn't good enough, would Pep Guardiola, one of the greatest managers of all time, be playing him? Chances are probably wouldn't. So I think some people are down on him. They're not really watching him. But for the way football works and life works, if you think someone's no good, you wait for them to do something that's not good and say that means that they're no good. But in reality, he's doing a good job because otherwise, this run that City have been on, where the performances have been more promising, he wouldn't have featured him. But still, he's a bigger part of it indeed.
You're right about the way that people think. I mean, remember Wimbledon in the old days under Dave Bassett were the long ball merchants. And
Mm.
long after that had stopped and Wimbledon started playing football on the ground, I think Joe Kinnear was the manager at the time, people were still going on about the long ball. And equally, was it Mangala who made an exceptional debut against Chelsea and then got slaughtered after that and he never played quite as well, sort of thing. So, on
Ian, honestly,
performance.
to tell your story, like in regards to that, and for me, me as a City fan, there was before I was playing, then when I was playing, I was in other leagues playing with different teams, so you can't have the same connection because you're rooting for your own team first that you're playing for. But from when I retired, I remember one of the first games I saw was in the pandemic. I was lucky enough to be in the stadium because I was working for City at the time, and I think it was like City versus Everton. And on the next day, I was on Radio Manchester and I was asked, I don't think it was Mike Mane asked, like, did anyone impress you from the performance? And I said, Rodri. This was like 2020, 21. I said, Rodri. And people started biting my head off. Oh, he's no good. He's this, that, and the other. But I was literally just talking about that performance in that game. And people were like, no, 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 no. And the dislike that they had for him or the love they had for Fernandinho meant that they would never be able to give someone credit whenever it was due. And at the time, his name was slightly unpopular. In time, you see what he became, and obviously his intro to the team wasn't perfect. But if you make a decision too early, you miss out on things which really do matter, and that is an example of it. And it's it's disappointing at times. And another narrative that goes on, like people say, "Oh, City are boring, City are boring." Listen, if your team is scoring 100 goals a season, like I'd love to know what boring is. I think for me, boring might be if you're scoring, say, 20, 30 in a season and you're hoping, oh, in fact, no, let me deal with the elephant in the room, especially to those that are listening. I played for the Man City side that did not score at home for 3 months at the end of the season. Okay. If you come into the city of Manchester at that point, that is boring. Okay. Let's call it what it is. These guys are not boring. They're some of the best players that we've ever seen in the Premier League in world football. And they entertain us in a way which feels really joyous to us and leads to a lot of success, which is why they're history makers.
You make some great points. I'll come back to you, Paul, in a second, but we've not heard yet from Toby. So let's hear from you, Toby, on whatever you want to say about anything you've heard or what you've seen in the last couple of weeks.
It's been some great points from you guys already, to be fair. It's interesting a narrative, isn't it? And what Paul and Nedum kind of touch on there. It's interesting how we're almost made out to be the villains, the 115, and then Kusanov becomes the sort of the scapegoat when he first joins. The kid was 20 when he played his debut. He's 21 now. His birthday's on a leap year. So he was 20 years old, didn't speak a word of English, the first Uzbekistani player to play in the Premier League ever. He had a rotten. He did have. I disagree with Paul. We did have a rotten debut, but I didn't jump on it. I didn't. No one booed him. Everyone clapped him. It was great. It was brilliant to see the support around him. And since that, I mean, even probably include that. He's probably been our best defender since he signed. It's been amazing. He's been incredible. He's got a bit of everything. He's got the. You can see he's got the awareness. He's got the pace. He's been absolutely incredible, and I back him fully because he can, as Nedum says, can be an absolutely incredible player. I just want to I'll go sort of a different direction to what you guys. I mean, I was going to come across similar sort of points to what you guys already said. So there's no real point me talking about the performance. I thought it was, like Nedum said, a very professional performance. We've been slagged off for fielding a weaker side in the amongst other teams in the FA Cup and disrespecting the cup in inverted commas, all that sort of thing. I thought it was a very strong lineup, very strong bench. So I don't think we can ever be accused of that. I don't think he didn't take it seriously. He rested, but he also played the players and he brought on Haaland. So it was very professional. And we did see out the game despite a minor scare. Last season I might have sat there, put my feet up and gone, it's fine. We'll score 4 in the second half. But I did sit there at 1-0 and thought, oh God, okay, right, we've got to prepare for this. But what I would like to say, I've come on this podcast a lot, especially recently, and talked about fans and talked about tribalism and how this sport is for the fans. And I'd like to really highlight the Plymouth fans because there was 8,000 of them that travelled from Plymouth. That is a long journey. I was talking to a couple of Plymouth fans on the way out the stadium, and we talk about football fans in general. And the first thought around two football fans coming out of a stadium of opposite supporting, or they'll fight each other. That might be the first thought for some people. And that stigma, oh, well, the hooliganism in football. And this Plymouth fan was stood next to me. He just had a chat with me. And we had this sort of 15-minute chat walking back into town. And it was so nice, so refreshing just to talk to a fan. And they were saying, these two guys, that the goal was everything. We lost, but it was a great performance for us. But we got a goal, and that meant everything to us. I got to give credit to every single one of them Plymouth fans that made that journey. It was absolutely incredible. And I was speaking to them, and there's this guy that one of them that does every game home and away. Plymouth, the furthest team in this country. Imagine playing Carlisle, Sunderland, all of these teams that are so far out the country. And we talk about football, and there's always noise around the 115 and the big six clubs in general. And we got these banners up. The one against Liverpool saying "Stop exploiting loyalty." Stop exploiting loyalty. Those are the fans that matter. Those are the fans that keep this sport going, that spend their money and their time traveling around this country and some around the globe watching their football team play. And it's just incredible. And it really, when I had that conversation, as I say, like some people will get a distorted image. Of course, there is hooliganism in football, and I completely disagree with all of it. I hate it. I hate violence. I hate that there's that around it. But what I do love is that when you walk out the ground, you can have a chat with a fan of an opposing side, and they talk to you about their football journey. And for me, I'm a City fan, and I've been around Europe. I've been to Istanbul, Champions League final. You, Paul, and Ian, you guys have had a slightly lower time down in League One, the lower divisions, and then it's come up and up and up. And Nedum, you play for the club as well, so it's all different perspective and all different areas. But we've all got the same journey. We've all got the same love for our teams, and I just that's what I wanted to really highlight. And there's stories like that for every single team and every single fan across the country. I think that stop exploiting loyalty. People see the slogan and they might move on and they might not look into it. But I think it's so important that we really drive into this, because we are the fans that go every week, that support the teams. We drive this industry. Those players on the pitch wouldn't be there without us as fans. And I've got huge amounts of respect for you, Nedum, as well, because you, as you said earlier, were a City fan growing up and then played for the club. You must have felt immense pride playing for your club. If I was ever a football player, God, that was never going to happen. But if I was ever a football player, I'd love to play for Manchester City. Not for money, not for fame, but just because they're my football club and I love them to pieces. And no, sorry, it's gone a bit of a passionate rant, but I haven't been on for a few weeks and obviously been listening to everyone else talk about it. So I thought I'd just highlight that, because I thought that conversation I had with those Plymouth fans on the way out was just incredible, and it really highlights what football is all about and what sport is all about.
You're spot on to say all that, and I want to say this now, because I don't normally say this sort of thing, but you know that obviously I have a YouTube channel and I do a vlog at every game, and there are times when people have said, why don't you get opposing fans on as well? And yesterday, because I had a bit of footage from 1988 when City last played Plymouth in the FA Cup, and it was me commentating back in the day, 37 years ago. I put a little bit of the footage on, and I also interviewed Paul Simpson and Paul Molden, who scored goals in that game. And then after that, I went and found a Plymouth fan, and this was my target, who I thought, oh, there must be somebody who will have travelled up from Plymouth who was at that game in 1988. And I found one straight away. And it was great to put him on the vlog and have representation. And the more I mingled with the Plymouth fans, because there were loads of them there really early, they were in the Asda across the road, they were mingling around. I thought, what lovely people these are. I didn't find one Plymouth fan who wasn't just a normal, really nice person who you could talk to. And it was so refreshing. I enjoyed being in their company so much. There were some Plymouth fans actually mixed in who got tickets near where I was, and I didn't see any aggression from them. Actually, bizarrely, I saw a couple of City fans getting really angry because they had the wrong colours on, and I thought, isn't it a shame that the maybe this is me being naive, but that we can't actually sit together, and that we have to all be segregated, sort of thing. Because I can, I'm quite happy to sit with the opposition fans and have a bit of a chat to them if I have to. But unfortunately, that's not how it is. But in terms of the Plymouth fans, they were the best away fans I have seen at the Etihad, I think, since it opened. And it was just, I loved it. And I cannot, go and have a look at the vlog, by the way, because I got a couple of other people who were on from Plymouth as well. And it was, and you know that the vlog that I do, it's not all about, and it isn't really the way that things are done generally. Most of these types of fan channels that are on YouTube are all about creating division and anger and calling people and being angry. And I've always, right from the start, and I've been doing this now for 8 or 9 years, wanted to talk to good, decent people with honest opinions. And I've been supported by former players like Nedum and lots of other former players. And I do it all, in my eyes, very respectfully and very, with the right sort of integrity. And that might not drive numbers through the roof and bring me in millions of pounds. I'm not a millionaire, and I'm frankly struggling to sort of make it work these days. But nevertheless, that's not a moan, it's just a fact. Because I'm not controversial, because I'm not challenging, because I don't rant and have a go. And it was just such a nice video to be able to put together. It won't get 100,000, 200,000 views. It deserves it, not because I did it, but just because it's about nice people. So just as you've ranted there, Toby, I wanted to say that. And when you're sitting there and you see, as I was yesterday, and you see this lovely fella, Nedum, come down helping this old guy down the steps. You think that's how this club is, that's how we are, that's how humanity should be. So thanks for doing that, Nedum. I know you didn't need your help in the end, but
He's
at least you were
could have
there
cared less
offering it,
about
weren't
me,
you?
but the thought was there.
I'm right though, Nedum, aren't I?
Yeah, absolutely. Why, yeah. I think there's obviously different sides to football, and maybe if City would have lost that game yesterday, it could have been a bit more hostile and so on. But it ends up being nice because the right team wins, and for Plymouth, they got a chance to see their team score as well. That's the happy ending that you can get for some of these ties. But then also as well, you mentioned like being able to sit with away fans. I'm pretty sure there are probably some fan bases which you wouldn't like to sit next to for periods of time. But we don't need to mention them. Everyone can sort of fill in the blanks wherever they need to. But yeah, I understand that. And I think what I like about football in some ways is like we're all in the stadium, we're all of different generations, different memories, but that's the thing that sort of brings us together. Like there's football that can bring people together, which I see all around the world, and then they're supporting the same team, feeling the same emotions, like celebrating actions together. Outside of like sport, that doesn't happen very often. When Nick O'Reilly scores that first goal, 50,000 people jump in the air. He scores a second, 50,000 people jump in the air, and hundreds of thousands around the world at the same time. There's something about that identity and that connection. And even for the Plymouth fans themselves, they're all traveling up knowing the journey back is going to be hell on earth, but it's going to be a joy for them to be in that stadium, the stadium where they've seen their Premier League title winners 4 times in a row, where they've seen some of the best teams in world football play, some of the best players in world football play. And even from the Plymouth players and the staff, like it's a good occasion and City look after them because City themselves, they have a history which has featured being in the Football League. They understand the nature of some of these teams. So they don't act as if they're holier than thou and you guys just go and figure this out for yourself. They're welcoming because it's still a family club, even though the scale of it is astronomical and probably beyond any sort of like thought we probably had 20 years ago.
Very true. I mean, the other thing, and I'm sure you will know a couple of the people I'm talking about here, Paul, but a lad called Colin who suddenly passed away a few days ago, who was in his 50s, who I saw a lot of the away games, who was just the nicest man. I didn't even know his name was Colin, and yet I'd seen him for like 25, 30 years, talked to him regularly. He'd been on the vlog, and he was such a lovely, nice, kind man. And when you lose somebody like that, and we all see week by week postings on social media of people that are part of the City family that we've lost, that is as important as watching a football match, isn't it? That the City family is not a myth, is it? Paul, I'm asking
Sorry.
you because I know you will
Yeah,
know some of those types of the
yeah, I
players.
do. He was from Failsworth, I think. So that's where I'm from. So he's no, there's a few. I mean, there's a guy. I always find it funny, me, because it's I'm on block 111, so I'm on the seg line next to the away fans. So I've been going in that bit now for probably about 9, 10 years, maybe. Um, and you've got your own little family. I mean, I know some of the names, but I have to walk. It's weird to get to my seat because you've got to kind of get down and go a long way around to get to it. So every home game, I'm having to push past people if you like. And I know them all now. There must be like 30 people in that line, and I don't know what they're called, but I always get a pat on the back. I always get, "Hiya, mate, you okay?" We walk down, we get to the end. I know the stewards, I know the policemen, I even know some of the away fan stewards. There's a guy from Spurs who I see every time we play Spurs, and he's always there. He always comes and says hello. And these fans who I know, but everybody around you, you kind of watch them grow up. There's like a young girl sits a few seats. You've kind of watched her grow up. She's grown into a young lady now. A guy in front of me, called Dave. Jeff. He died about 4 or 5 seasons ago, and we was devastated. We was all devastated because the football family. I mean, I don't know them outside the football. I just know them. I don't even know the names, most of them. I don't know the names. They don't even know my name, but we all get there on and everyone's patting you on the back. You're all saying hello, and you know things about them, but then you go home and you do your own thing. And I'm pretty sure that happens at a lot of football clubs, if not most of them. But there seems something very special at City. Um, it's daft this, but my business, some of the best people I deal with are City fans. I mean, I get customers coming into my garage who follow me on Twitter. I've never met them. I've never met. There was a couple, one day when we were out of Madrid that came up to us. She knew you, and then she says, "Oh, are you Prestige Car Repairs?" And it's like, yeah. And it was like I was famous all of a sudden. But she's since messaged me and said she's going to be bringing a car in a couple of weeks. So it's. I always say, but City fans a different class to me. They've got a great sense of humour. Nothing's too serious, and we can laugh at ourselves and get on with it. And it is a great family to be in. I've got to say, it really is.
As a younger fan from the south as well, which we know, Toby, do you detect this sort of togetherness as there is, and caring for each other? Because I mean, we're four blokes, right, sat here talking at the moment, and people say that men struggle to talk about problems that they have, etc. I'm not saying, by the way, that we all go along to a football match and start talking about our private lives and the problems we've got, but it has to be good for your mental health to actually have friends and bond, create these bonds. And football, without football, I'm not sure I would have as many friends that I've got. Most of my friends have come through football, through a lifetime in football. So it's got to be good. Do you see that yourself as a young southerner?
How did you know I was from the south?
By the way, he
Uh,
now lives in Manchester, so
He drinks lattes.
I, um, nah, do you know what? I live in Manchester now, but I used to travel 200 miles every weekend for a home game, and a home game is a away game for me. So when I got the crap for being a Southern City fan, oh, why are you a City fan? Well, I traveled, yeah, a very long way. I used to travel a very long way for a home game. So, and I think bang on exactly what you're saying, and I won't go into it now because it's not the time or the place. But that's what's so wrong about the whole Flexi Gold stuff in terms of the season ticket. What Paul was saying. You have a community around you, and I'm exactly the same. I have people I sit where in my seat. I've changed a few times, but in the seats that I sit now, got very good relationships with the people that I sit around. You build those relationships just like you do in life. But I feel like there's more in it with football. I think what I touched on earlier with sort of tribalism, and you're all sort of feeling the same emotions, aren't you? Whether you have the same opinions or not. Of course, as humans, we're wired to have different opinions. Of course, that's absolutely fine. But when we're all got the same intention, I don't know how you guys experienced it when you were younger. I think it's very difficult because the club's very successful now. So when you're a younger fan, you're supporting the club at here, whereas yourselves, Ian, Paul, and plenty more started supporting the club when they were down, down, probably down to the bottom of my building.
I've got to admit, I started supporting City when we were winning the league in '68.
Oh, right, okay, well, you're just a great big glory hunter, aren't you? No, um, no. Look, so of course, it's a different dynamic now. What Paul says about we got a sense of humor. We kind of don't take ourselves too seriously, and I do feel that as well. Of course, even though all I've seen us do is win. Sorry, but there is, of course, there's that sense of community. I think I said it ages ago. I think it was last season. That treble season, I've never felt such a connect with the fans ever before. And I know, of course, we were so successful, so it was easier to feel happier at the games because everyone's so happy and so joyful. But I don't think it was just that. I think there was a sense of community within the home games, within the away games, especially. Of course, away games, you get the best of your support. Every club does, because those are the fans that go every week, etc., etc. And I felt there was I think I said it a couple of seasons ago when we were in that season, or potentially even last season. There was a special connection between the players and the fans, and for that, there's such a gap between players and fans these days across a lot of levels of the game. You have to go quite low for there to be, the old connections that you've had, Ian. But it felt like there was a connection that the players really understood the fans, and that was great. And I think it fed into the fans' behaviour with each other, and it created a community-like sense. I think the treble changed things, changed the landscape and the dynamic of the club. It made us a global, probably one of the biggest clubs on the planet in this, certainly this generation, with that achievement. You know, we label fans that have come from other countries, and you know that's absolutely fine. But that obviously then you mix that with the core of the City fans who support them like yourselves for years and years and years. Myself supporting them from my dad, and it becomes more disconnected because you're mixing communities, and that's absolutely fine. But you know, when you have a local little club or a local club, you have more of a community. Whereas when you become on a global scale, it's harder to create that sense of community, I think. So
Well,
of
actually,
course
let me stop you there. Not because I'm not interested in what you're saying, but because that leads into a little area we can talk to Nedum about. Obviously, you were there, Nedum, as this club started to transform. You've been a fan. You grew up in Clayton, and now you're working within the club. And I know you will talk to players, and you will also travel globally as a sort of ambassador. How are you seeing it all changing? And when you talk to your former teammates or any current players now, from their perspective, how has it changed? Is it just because now they're multimillionaires and kept in a bubble that this disconnect is happening, or what's your take on it all?
Well, so just a quick thing. I played for Clayton, but I initially lived in Miles Platte. So I actually drive past my house when I go to the stadium now. Actually, so I lived in Miles Platte and I lived in Harper Hay and I live in Middleton now. And as I leave Middleton, I have to drive past Harper Hay and Miles Platte to get to the stadium. And listen, I'm relieved that like I live a bit further away from the stadium these days. Let's just say that. But in regards to how much it changed, so to put it into context, like I am technically part of the like Man City Former Players Association, yeah, and it's an important thing in terms of connecting yourself with the players from the past who sort of dictated the club's like present, future, and so on. But then you see how their situation was very different, not just at City, but for the way that football was at that time. And then you fast forward to now, and like the Former Players Association could have like, somebody who played in the 80s, but then he could also technically have a Sergio Aguero. The difference is the person that played in the 80s still lives in Manchester. Sergio Aguero could live anywhere on planet Earth. And, the influx of like foreign talent and such into the Premier League itself means that, things are different in terms of what like recently former players like live and so on. But one thing for sure is that when you come to the club's history matters. And I think what makes it important and what I love more than anything is like Guardiola is my favorite coach of all time. But look at the way he talks about the city. He spent most of his managerial career here. He looks at Paul Dickhoff same way he looks at Erling Haaland. But there'll be lots of people that don't know Paul Dickhoff, but like Pep knows and understands what he means to the club. He knows and understands what it means in '99. He knows and understands what it means when we didn't have derbies in the first few years of the Premier League in the late '90s, rather. So the club's history does matter. But as football's grown, and I remember this in particular because I was in the Premier League at the time, the globalization of it meant that things changed for everybody because not only now do you say after a game speak to somebody from the MEN or say like Radio Manchester, before you know it, here is this Chinese broadcaster, here is this Indian broadcaster, here is this European broadcaster, here is this company you've never heard of before, here is a journalist from here. The scale is enormous. So now for those players, their expectations are very different. Whereas previously, you just go here, go there, go to a supporters club. The club is so big now that you've got thousands of supporters clubs from all around the world. And I'm one of those people that understands that like a fan of a club that's from the city is probably the most obvious way to describe a fan base, but there are people who take huge interest in Man City who love the club as much as someone that's from here. But what they don't have is the identity of being here, but they love it as much. They stay up through to like 2, 3 in the morning to watch the games because it's everything to them. And those people, like, they do matter. So I think the club has changed because there's huge interest. And when, for myself and lots of others, like the reason, in my opinion, I could be way off the mark here, and Ian, feel free to correct me or don't, it's up to you. The reason United and Liverpool have such a big fan base is because once upon a time they were really good. And those people who were getting an interest in football saw what was the best version of it at that time, and it was those teams. Well, for the last 10, 15 years, it's been Man City. So when I'm lucky enough to go and travel around the world with the club, to India, to like Canada, to this place, Norway, wherever, there are way more City fans around the world than you'd ever think, because unless you go out, you don't see it. And that is due to the scale of the Premier League and the scale of who is the flag bearer for the Premier League, is the most successful side. It's the side that plays the best football. It's the side that's got the most charismatic manager, one of the best number 9s in world football. And so, unfortunately, because of that scale, it at times becomes harder to maintain the identity. But what I take pride in is the fact that the people who are at the club are trying to. They're trying to listen to the people that matter, the people that have always been going there. And it's at times it's a thankless task because the moment you give someone something, someone says, "Well, why not me?" And once upon a time, it's probably easier to be able to do that. But the amount of stakeholders and stuff involved in the city now, it's off the charts. The amount of interest off the charts. People putting in requests off the charts. And say, think for a second what the difference between, say, being Paul Dickoff in '99 when after he scores the goal or whatever and he goes to pens, like you would speak to Radio Manchester, you might get a national newspaper, maybe if they're bothered, but the story's about United. Whereas now Erling Haaland scores a hat trick and he goes into a press room. There could be 30 different broadcasters there saying, we want to speak to you. There could be 20 different written pieces. There could be 20 different social media pieces. And that's just on the straight after the game. Then the next day, then the next day, the next day. So the scale's changed. The club itself has obviously had to change because I think Danny said himself, like once upon a time, the club, I think there's probably less than 100 staff and now they sit at 1,000 just domestically. Think about the scale of the operation for that to be the case, from being at Main Road to being at the Etihad. The club's different, football's different. City are one of the biggest operations within world football. And unfortunately, I think at times people do feel sad because it has changed so much. But unfortunately, as I've seen, it's very tough to be big and small at the same time because we want those sort of like small home comforts. But in reality, the scale of the Premier League itself means that not many teams can afford to do that. And the ones that do, they end up being the ones who end up sliding down divisions back to the Championship, for example, anyway. If
Makes
that
I'd
stands
say, I
up.
mean, just very quickly, I mean, just touch on what Nedum said just at the very start with in terms of the players, in terms of the likes of Paul Dickoff and Aguero. I think the slogan in the changing room is some are born here, some are drawn here, but we all call it home. And I
Yeah.
think that pretty much just sums it up perfectly.
You're right. I mean, one thing I noticed in the news this week, my son drew my attention to it, was I think they're called the Houston Astros. You'll know better than me, Nadim. You played over in the
Yeah.
MLS and for Salt Lake, were you Salt Lake, weren't you, for a
Right,
while?
yeah. Yeah.
And apparently they did a viral, well, they didn't design it to be viral, but they did a tweet this week or a social media message that went viral, which basically apologized to their own. They were playing at home to Miami, which of course is where Messi is, and they apologized to their own fans that Messi was injured and couldn't play, so offered their own home fans a free ticket to the next game as an apology, if you like, or compensation for not having seen Messi. I hope we don't get to that stage. Can you imagine a scenario where City are playing Real Madrid in the Champions League and
Where,
Vinicius Junior is injured and we say, we're really
well,
sorry that Vinicius Junior is not playing, but we'll let you come to the next game free as compensation.
listen, I
I
hope
think
you're,
all
They'd
City
be
fans would
celebrating,
cheer.
wouldn't they?
listen, I hope you're out here. The Houston Astros are the baseball team, so I wouldn't
All right.
expect Messi to be playing anyway. But
Well, it was some Houston
yeah, the
football
Dynamos,
team
Houston
anyway.
Dynamo,
Right,
yeah.
right.
But that's the thing. I think that's why like MLS is very different to global sports because a lot of the teams, firstly, are not old enough to have generations worth of fans, and the teams themselves, they can always get up and move at any particular point. So it is based around the stars and, the glamour and, you're going to come and see Messi. Whereas with football, like, you'll support City. In 10 years' time, maybe no player at City will be playing. But I tell you what we'll still do. We'll still support Man City because that's our football club. And I think that's something that's different at times between the sport over there versus over here because it's your identity. That's something I've seen the more time I get, the more chance I get to spend with fans and not just be playing as a pro. Like this is everything. Every fan base believes that their team is the most important thing in the world, and this is the best thing in the world. We will figure this out. In reality, maybe we're all psychopaths, but the fact is we're happy to continue doing it. And that's exactly who we are.